I think the war in Ukraine has been a stark reminder of the need to be strong when it comes to security and defense. I think it has highlighted that the world is not a peaceful and quiet place, but there are threats, and we cannot afford to be vulnerable.
We are now beyond 1 million direct employed. And when we say direct employee, these are people in the 4,000 companies that represents the ASD membership. Then the overall employment that this sector is creating is by far bigger, but that'll come at the end. We are also up to 290 billions in revenues, and we have 3 consecutive years with a 10% growth of the entire ecosystem. Here it becomes more interesting, though, I think, if you look at the details between the different years. So what happens is, obviously, 2020, we run into COVID. And COVID is affecting our sector with a huge impact. For the aeronautical sector, it is the biggest crisis that the aeronautical sector has ever experienced. And you can see that, and this is why I like this slide where we split, you can see here that the civil side is down 26% in 2020. That's a huge number. That's 1/4 of the business that is lost. And you can see at the same time that the defense sector is only down 4%. And the reason for that, the defense is more resilient in that perspective because they have long-term contracts with states, right? And those are not affected directly as market players are. So there's a huge difference between the impact on the sector, which means despite the 26% decrease on the aeronautical side, the ecosystem as a whole stops at the 14% due to defense. And that creates a resilience in the ecosystem because many of the companies are dual. They are active in both sides. So it's easier to handle the situation if one part of your business is under more constraint than the other part, right? And what you can see an effect of that, you could also see that in terms of the employment rate, it's only down with 3%. Despite losing 14% of the turnover, employment rate is only down 3%. And this is, again, first of all, there's a strategy. We speak about highly skilled people that you don't want to let go of unless you really have to. And you know it will be hard to find these people again if you let go of them. And secondly, you know that there will be a light in the tunnel after COVID, and then you will have a huge backlog, so you really want to try to keep as much staff as you can or much personnel as you can. So then we go in from 2020, we go to 2021. And that's the first year of major recovery. Here you can see that the trend is really shifting. The aeronautical sector now is up 26% as compared with the COVID year, which is already a remarkable recovery, although it's not fully recovered, but it's going in the right direction and at a high speed. And you can see that defense sector at 1%, so it has balanced off. It's not losing anything for the time being. It's more stable. But you can also see that in 2021, we are up 4% with the employments, which means that the people we had to let go of, we could contract them again, all of them. In fact, if you look at the details behind that number, you would see that we are now a little bit above pre-COVID levels on the employment rate, although not really there yet on the turnover. And then you have a 2022, in 2022, we have the outbreak of the war. And that outbreak of the war includes a number of effects on, first of all, it's an enormous tragedy, but besides that, from an ecosystem perspective and industry numbers, it affects our sectors differently. Of course, on the defense side, we are all aware of the increased demand that is skyrocketing, and where it's all about now whether we can deliver on the production capacities that are needed to deliver on the demand side. Whilst at the same time, we have a number of problems. We have shortages we have problems in supply chains. We have shortages in raw materials. We have had skyrocketing energy prices and might have it again. We have the skills issue. There's a number of problems now to deliver from that perspective and to be able to actually fill the demand side with production capacities. And the outcome of all of that is that the civil sector here is again increasing, but now with 13% as compared to 26%. So it's still moving in the right direction, but it's starting to fight a number of challenges. Whilst the defense sector is up 10%. And this is the biggest jump in the defense sector that we've seen for many decades. The need, the demand side, is by far bigger, but it's a challenge to ramp up the production capacities. And the orders, and there's a delay in terms of the orders as well, so it's a problem on both sides, both to produce, but also you cannot take the risk before you have the contract. But you'll hear more from Micael on that, I guess. But all of this leaves us with a 10% increase in total, another 5% in terms of employees, and that's the starting point for the war. And then the war continues. In 2023, we see the effect on the defense side where the demand is still there, it's even higher. And now the production is coming up to breach a bit of the gap as well. We have a 17% increase on the defense side. We have a 3% increase on the civil side. Market demand is big here. I guess Guillaume will maybe comment on that. But there are difficulties making it tricky to really deliver on the full market demand. So from that perspective, when you take a look at 10% increase each year, in 3 years in a row, it's really different in between the different years. So if we take a look at the EU, ASD EU footprint, as we said, we have industry members within EU, but also outside of EU. So if you look at the activities in the EU 27 member states and look at how big is the ASD share of that, we end up with 98%, meaning basically that all economic activities in this sector within EU countries are being represented through ASD. It's only 2% that is not represented through ASD. The other circle says the same. The numbers are not identical, but it's on the employment and the technique is the same. And if you do it the other way around, you take a look at what is the ASD turnover and look at how big is the EU component and the non-EU component, then you end up with this pie here, and where you can see 3/4 of the turnover is within EU countries, and 1/4 of the turnover is coming from non-EU countries. And non-EU countries in ASD, from that perspective, UK, Norway, and Turkey. So this is where you have such a big contribution. Last, we're getting to the end of my presentation. We did this last year as well. So what we do is a financial or further economic impact analysis. It's not us doing it, it's S&P doing it. So, but we introduce it in the facts and figures as well. And what we look at is not just the turnover and the employment rates, but we look at what is the contribution to GDP. We look at the indirect economic contributions that you get from going further down in supply chain to suppliers also outside the sector. So you try to follow the supply chain as far as it goes. And with the induced economic contributions, you look at all the people that are working in the sector, they are spending their money, right? So they buy a house, they rent a house, they buy a car, they buy a TV, they book a travel, whatever. And that creates, yet again, economic activity. So the whole idea here is to see what is the contribution to the overall activity, overall financial activity in a society. And this is where you see it is an internationally agreed model that S&P is using. And what it delivers is that we said just a few minutes ago that we have 1 million employees. If you look at the number of people being actually supported with jobs through this sector, it's close to 4 million. So there's a ratio close 1 to 4. If you look at the turnover, we just reached 290, but the overall turnover that we're generating is close to 700 billion. And the contribution, the value-added contribution to GDP is 286. So that's huge numbers. It is also a high-tech sector. It's a high salary sector from that perspective. So the wages are 43% higher than the EU average. And that leaves us at 59,000 euros. And with that, this is where we are, so a little bit of the history, and for the challenges and the outlook and looking forward, I would like to leave the floor to Guillaume.
So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here this morning. That's a great pleasure to see everyone. I'll share the introduction with Micael that will take the defense part, and I'll try to take a bit of the more global introduction and a few words on civil aerospace. So maybe my first point is on the relevance of this sector for Europe. We are a growing sector at a time where growth is missing in Europe. Actually, we are growing fast. There's a very strong demand in the world for our products. And we're facing a situation, I will come back to it later, where demand is actually higher than supply. Supply is a challenge, but demand is very strong, and we prove that we have very competitive products with the demand we have. We have an opportunity to further contribute to trade in a positive way, because we have a positive trade surplus when it comes to civil aeronautics and the broader demand for our products beyond Europe. That's a very positive trend for the industry, for jobs, for investment, for innovation, for skills. So that's something that makes us attractive as a sector for Europe. We're contributing to mobility, to the development of a lot of other sectors, to connectivity inside Europe and between Europe and the rest of the world. We're actually serving our products worldwide. So what we do in terms of competitiveness or in terms of decarbonization is something that not only impacts Europe, but also impacts the broader performance in terms of carbon intensity of what is being used in the world to grow the decarbonization agenda. So that's a sector that proves through its figures, the one that have been shown earlier, that we can further contribute to growth. I will make few remarks when it comes to can I give it back to you? I'm sorry, because I have my papers here. Few remarks when it comes to the Draghi report, when it comes to defense and space, because we are fully supporting and sharing the views expressed by the Draghi report. But obviously, when it comes to aerospace, we are in a different place, even if we are suffering from the same challenges when it comes to cost of labor, cost of energy, regulatory complexity and burden. That also applies to civil aerospace, but still through innovation, we manage to overcome those challenges and be the leading sector in the world. Trying to stay short and assuming everybody in the room supports the idea that Europe is stronger with aerospace than without, we have our challenges to make this happening. And indeed, as we have a strong demand for our products, no surprise that the challenges are more on the supply side. The first challenge for this industry at the moment is ramp up, is to deliver on the huge backlog that we have through the demand for our products. And it comes with the need for labor, availability of jobs, of people, of employees, skilled employees, because we are in an industry where highly skilled people are required. You saw earlier that the average salary is significantly higher than the average of the European landscape. It's because the jobs are highly skilled jobs, and we need more of this. We need also a supply chain that works. We are delivering a small number of highly complex and sophisticated products that come with a very large number of parts, and we don't deliver those products with one part missing. We don't deliver a plane almost finished. So basically what I'm trying to suggest is that we need a supply chain that is fully in order, everybody at the same pace, and we are moving forward at the pace of the slowest. Given all the challenges we've been going through and the disruptions with COVID, with war, with cost of energy, with inflation, with logistic challenges around the world, that's not a walk in the park. And indeed, we're spending a lot of time supporting the supply chain and supporting the weakest members of the supply chain. That's why industry associations really matter, because we're working as a group of companies, 4,000 at ASD, and a lot of actions are taking place within the national associations to support our startups, our SMEs, and the tier one suppliers. Obviously, the second challenge that we have is on the decarbonization. As CEO of Airbus, I've already expressed several times, many times, that I think a world with aviation is a much more stable world. It contributes to prosperity, to peace, to security, and people knowing each other and collaborating as a human society. But we need to decarbonize. And if we manage to decarbonize, aviation is just at the beginning. There will be by far more growth. That's what we see in developing countries, but also in mature countries. But would we not decarbonize, we'll face very quickly a situation where we will have to cap and then maybe reduce flights. So we are actively working on decarbonization, both on the products, so technologies for planes, but as well on the decarbonization of the fuels, and that's a bigger challenge that we are obviously addressing. That's a sector that is performing today, but that requires the conditions for success being supported, and that requires investment. So this sector must be supported in the way that investment must make sense in Europe rather than outside of Europe, back to my comments on the Draghi report. And it's a sector where partnership between public and private is very important. It's also a sector where duality means a lot. There's a lot of synergies and cross-fertilization between civil and military. We would not be as strong as we are today in defense if we would not be in civil and commercial, and vice versa. Defense is supporting technologies, progress, risk-taking in the field of civil aeronautics. So that's a sector that needs to be supported by an understanding in Europe, in the European countries, that defense and civil aerospace and defense come hand in hand. And a good performing civil aerospace helps for defense. A defense that is healthy in Europe, that is better supported than it is today, is also good for civil aerospace. We are in dual technologies, and we need the scale that comes from both sides to be performing. Would we not have this, we would probably not be where we are today in terms of global competitiveness. Then there's a sector where we are actually facing disruptions, where the challenges are probably higher than the opportunities in the short term. It's space. Space, we are fragmented in a world where some giants have emerged, especially in the US, but not only. They are emerging as well in China. They are not coming to the commercial side of the equation yet, so we don't see them too much. But in defense, Chinese companies are very strong. China is investing a lot, and they are competitors to come on the global scene. In the US, we have the giants. Obviously, SpaceX, Starlink is one of them, very successful. But we see that Amazon is coming, and overall the level of investment from the US, being through defense or other branches, is several times higher than what we do in Europe. So that's a sector which is challenged. We still have the right technologies, but we are missing the scale, and we need to access to export more than what we're doing today. We need to synergize, we need to restructure, we need to consolidate in a way that will lead to more scale effect in Europe in the face of this unbalance between the EU and the US, keeping a reach to export through the competitiveness that we need to recover. So a lot of things happening in space, and we'd be happy to take your question on this, but obviously that's an area where we are actively believing that space has to remain as one of the portfolio of our companies. We know that space is very important from a sovereign perspective to contribute to decarbonization, Earth observation, science, so there are plenty of reasons why we want to continue to be in space, plus the fact that it's an area of investment on new technologies, so that helps fueling innovation, and the border between what goes into the air versus what goes into space is becoming less and less clear, and we will see more and more objects taking off from the ground, flying far away from above, and then going from air to space, back to air, and probably several times. And therefore, we want a strong space industry in Europe, because we believe in the long term there will be no competitive aerospace without space. I mentioned quickly decarbonization, and I need to come back to it. That's a big challenge. We have taken this challenge head on. We are absolutely engaged in decarbonization of aviation. Europe has also fully engaged into this challenge, supporting the decision that have been taken at ICAO regarding the decarbonization trajectory, the 2050 carbon neutral objective, the need to grow, to ramp up on sustainable aviation fuels, and trying to drive the global consensus on sustainable aviation fuel, but that's obviously something that goes far beyond the aerospace sector, where we need to partner with regulators, with states, with the energy industry, with new players coming, with airports, airlines. So that's a big challenge. We are moving forward. There will be 3 times more sustainable aviation fuel being used this year than last year. That's the good news. The bad news, it's still 0.5% of the jet fuel being used around the world. And to go to the 6% or the 10% we believe we need by 2030, there's still a lot of need for projects, for investment. The US and China are accelerating big time. The US through the IRA and China through the planning and the investment they're making in the state-owned companies for SAF. Europe wants to accelerate as a mandate, but there's more to be done in Europe, and we believe as well the Middle East is an area of expectations, and we are engaging with them. So a lot of progress, but probably not enough compared to the speed we need, so more work on the agenda. I think we can be reasonably satisfied of the strong acceleration, but still more to come, more needed. So I'd like to close by saying that we are a sector, and the growth is a testimony for it, that is driving innovation, that is driving technology, that is driving jobs, that is driving prosperity, taxes for governments. Obviously, there's a tension between the growth and the decarbonization. That is a matter of discussion, but we have a way forward, and we want to be part of the clean industrial deal that will come, because that's a way to frame with the authorities, with the leadership of Europe and of the countries, how we move forward. But we believe Europe with a strong aerospace is a stronger Europe. So that's for the aerospace part. I think I have covered most of what I wanted to say. Again, Draghi report is something that is very meaningful, mostly for space that I covered briefly, and what Micael will share when it comes to defense and the challenges we have with defense. Civil aviation, civil aerospace is growing, but suffering from the same challenges. And if we don't take care, we could follow the path of the slow agony of decline, to use the words of Draghi, that we see on many industries. That is something that we could suffer from on aerospace as well. Therefore, we should not be complacent. It's fragile. We have strong products, strong demand, but we need to be very mindful of the conditions that are required to keep going in that direction. Good morning, everyone. Facing rain and traffic jam in Brussels. Micael, with this, I'd like to hand over to you before, Jan, I think we move to the Q&A afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillaume. And also from my side, happy to see so many here this morning, and happy to take questions, of course, afterwards as well. A few comments from my side and on the defense side and where we're going. I mean, obviously, there is no more incentive to try and grow defense capability and deterrence than having a war in Europe that is still ongoing with tremendous intensity and devastation and so much suffering. So if we can't get our act together now in collaborating and also from a national perspective within Europe, I don't know what we need to sort of do to step up. And this is sort of a dual type of war in terms of what it looks like. It's a war of attrition, it's a war about capacity, and it's also a war about sort of innovation and embracing new technologies in a way that we haven't seen before. And if we as defense industries do not sort of really take our part of that and help, which we are, of course, then there won't be any deterrence and defense capabilities, because we need a very, very strong defense industry in Europe. And when I speak to my colleagues in ASD, of course, we are all doing tremendous investments and initiatives to step up, and we are at the same time aware of that we need to do even more. And as Jan showed, I mean, the average growth is 17%, and some of us are growing more than that, some of us are growing a little bit less, depending on what type of portfolio you have in your company. But to stop now would be devastating. And if you look upon the governments within Europe now, of course, many of them are spending more. But it's different depending on where you are in Europe. That's on my perspective. It's different if you are in the northern or eastern part of Europe, being Poland or the Baltic states or Finland maybe. There are no compromises at all. They invest what's needed to make sure that there will never be something bad happening again, creating an eastern shield, if you call it like that. While there is a little bit more, in my perspective, my view, hesitation or in-between sort of approach in other parts of Europe on how to handle it. And I heard some figures now, which I think Ida has sort of tabled or will table today, that sort of the average now is maybe sort of short of 2%, if you look upon it, of the GDP spending. 1.9 or something, which means that since Poland is doing 5%, there must be some countries doing a lot less as we speak. And we started from a very low point. We were in a peace dividend, and we are now really racing to do more as countries, as industry, and also the focus from the Commission is substantial now when it comes to defense and defense politics and initiatives that they want to run and start. The tabling of the European defense industry strategy in the spring is, of course, pointing absolutely, in my view, in the right direction. Supporting the European defense industry by more European, think about how we can be more resilient when it comes to our supply chain and what we need in terms of security of supply, everything from components to powder to raw materials. The full-fledged ecosystem, as also Guillaume was touching upon, needs to be much more resilient than it is today. And we have to now, we're approaching, in my perspective, some sort of make or break perspective in terms of how much do we want to collaborate. Because this is national sovereignty. This is the nations sort of deciding how much money on top of the national spending do they want to also spend together, using the initiatives and the incentives that the Commission tables. And as I see it, looking at, again, the Draghi report points also in this direction of how much money we should really need to spend over the next decade to remain competitive also in the defense industry. We're talking hundreds of billions of euros and not what has been tabled for the first few years under the European Defence Industrial Programme, sort of 1.5 billion euros. Then nothing will happen. So we have to decide, do we want to do more together, which we did when we had no choice during the pandemic, in line with what the Draghi report is saying? Then we have to get to political decisions in the Commission and create consensus around that. And also van der Leyen has indicated that we need to spend a lot more in the next MFF to do more things together. And I'm a strong supporter of that, being European. But the one doesn't take away the other, of course. Nation has to take responsibility, but we have to do more together to create scale. Because otherwise we will be fragmented, we will do nice things in the countries, but we will never become a competitive player compared to the US and other players in the global perspective. And this has to now be managed and discussed in the Commission, and we will see what happens now in the next Commission when it comes into play. And Ursula von der Leyen has also changed the organization, of course, and obviously placed a new defense commissioner in the organization, Andrius Kubilius. And what I've heard and what I've talked about with him is that his agenda is quite ambitious. I mean, he also wants this collaborative approach to this. So he will really push to make this European Defence Industrial Programme be successful going forward and create collaborative sort of incentives going forward. And I really hope that that will be something that we will get through. So it's a little bit of a make or break. And this white paper that he, Andrius Kubilius, and Kaisa Kallas will now produce within 100 days on how Europe will and must step up when it comes to defense capabilities, and how we must buy more European because the dependency on the US specifically today is much too high, and that needs to change over the coming years to create resilience and deterrence and security supply in Europe. I'm all for competition, of course, but we have to look upon our own continent and think about the reciprocal behavior we have between US and Europe. It is not balanced. If we establish ourselves in the US, it is under very strict rules and regulations without so much influence from a corporate perspective if you're a defense company and what you can do with your local company in the US. Of course, US companies can be on European soil under the same type of regulations and add to the European defense capabilities and deterrence going forward. But we have to have more security supply and more sovereign capabilities on this continent, Europe, going forward, because we will have the unpredictable aggressive neighbor to the east for a long, long time going forward. And all of these things are in play as we speak. Industry is working really hard, investing heavily, but I must say that the objectives and the targets that the governments and the Commission and NATO is putting into place must be transformed into long-term commitments. We've said that many times. We are not complaining about order intake, but it is about sort of investing in new facilities, factories, the supply chain, under the next 15 to 20 years. That needs much more long-term commitments from governments and the Commission and NATO than what we have today to take these steps. So in my head, we still take good incremental steps, increasing our capacity and capability, but we have not really realized as Europe, that we have a big bang or a paradigm shift or whatever you want to call it going forward. And that's a little bit of a problem now to start realizing that, to take the big steps. But again, many positive signs are going in the right direction, of course, and this new Defense Commission and what he wants to achieve is, of course, very positive, and we're looking forward to work with him. So ASD has never been a more important voice, I think, in this turbulent sort of situation that we are in right now, and all the changes we're looking at going ahead. We need to be a strong European industry voice and working with the files that the Commission will now table to create the incentives for us to work together going forward. So I look forward to that, to work with that, of course, together with the rest of the organization. I think I will stop there and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. So let's move over to the Q&A session. I'll stand up so it's easier to see, and I can already see a number of hands in the air. We'll take them one by one, I think. When you get the question, present yourself, which organization, and to whom you are directing the question, if it's a specific question. Just want to come back and mention also what, obviously, the eye of our president is very sharp. It's sharper than the entire communications department at ASD, so you are correct. There is a mistake. I want to mention that page 13 illustration at the top, the numbers you see are correct, but the lead text that is pointing at the part of the pie here, our lead text are mixed between two. So if you want to use the numbers are correct. And we will correct this well on the online version, and we will print a new version that is corrected. Having said that, yes, let's see, hands in the air. We can start with the lady, I think.
Yeah. Good morning, Katerina Tani, Future Warfare. I would like to ask a question to both of you. It's quite a general question. I would like to know what you expect when it comes to the what do you expect to happen within the defense and aerospace industry following the Trump election? Thank you. I mean, a general picture, because I know there are many challenges and opportunities, but thank you very much.
Well, I must say that I've said this many times. I mean, it's not really about the administration in the US and whether Trump's now, well, he will come into power. That's not a question anymore. But independently of the administration in the US, we need to realize that we have to do much more in the European perspective. So that's the way I see it. I don't think it will be any change to all the defense industries that have sort of the local company in the US in terms of how much capability will be needed in the US. So that won't change, I think. It's urgent independently that we step up and work on the investments and sovereign capabilities in Europe, and that I don't see a difference in between the administrations going forward, honestly.
Maybe as a complement, we are in a fast-changing environment. There are plenty of things changing by the day, including in Europe, for Europe, with all the new regulations coming and the new ways of looking at things and the new policies, and now the Clean Industrial Act. There will be one more change, which is what the Trump administration will come up with. We don't know yet what it will look like, but indeed, we know that it is probably reinforcing the need to be clear on what we want to do ourselves and acting more than reacting. I'm not suggesting we will not have to react, and there's an area that has been presented as an area of change with the administration to come, which is trade and potentially tariffs. And so we will have to understand what it means, by when, and it will be very important that the EU has a clear agenda of how they want to position themselves, how we want to position ourselves in the face of a different perspective when it comes to trade relationships. So we've been already with a Trump administration 4 years ago. A lot of things have been with continuity from Trump to Biden, and then probably to Trump again. What we see is Russia, is Ukraine, is the fast-changing environment in the world, is the China rising when it comes to a lot of technologies, and we can't wait for just observing what others are doing to decide on our own agenda. That's why we have our own agenda. Obviously, there will be things to adapt, and we will adapt as we've done in the past.
So let's continue with another one from the middle row, please, sir.
Jack Schickler from Euronews. You announced 17% growth in the defense industry. I wondered if you had any comment on the scale of that. Is that enough, given that war is now on Europe's doorstep, or what kind of figures were you expecting there? And more particularly today, it was announced by the European Defence Agency that there will be 4 new projects to cooperate on drones, warships, air defence, and so on. I wondered if your view on those projects, whether they're focusing on the right areas, and whether there's sufficient engagement from European industry on them.
Well, when it comes to the growth, I think we are probably running as fast as we can, but of course that could be expedited a bit in terms of how you do it, and some of us would probably need to grow a bit more. And to do that, of course, it's what I alluded to. It's about sort of long-term commitments to take the big investments that I think we will be needing going forward. That they are not really there yet, even though we invest a lot more than we did. And most of us has tripled our investments and quadrupled our output and things like that. But we should probably do even more. And that needs, of course, long-term commitment, but also access to funding. And I didn't mention that, but there's still sort of frustration in my head that we don't have a clear decision from EIB, European Investment Bank, to say that we can invest purely in defense-related capabilities. That would send signals into the big funds across Europe to sort of take another step forward. So we need to push even harder to grow more. I can't sort of say a specific number on growth, what's needed, but we should do more, definitely. I really support the initiatives that are cross-European. We need us quickly to get sort of in play the eligibility on access to funds and what rules must apply, and the rules for actually being in those consortium. But I do think it's the right sort of areas. Drone capabilities, swarm technologies, integrated air and missile defense systems is something absolutely as examples that we lack in European perspective. So it's the right way forward, definitely. I don't have another other comments than that. But we need to do more collaboration projects going forward, absolutely.
Maybe one remark from my side. I was surprised to discover the 17%. It's more than what I was thinking. And actually, when you dig into the reasons for this number, it's mainly driven by short-term replenishments, ammunition, missiles, and what is needed to support European countries supporting Ukraine. There's been actually little more investment when it comes to midterm and long-term systems, sophisticated systems, and there's more effort to be done. Yes, the areas of focus that you mentioned are good ones. There are a few others as well, but we need to take our eyes from the very short term and what it means to face the current situation, to take a more longer view, where indeed the scale will be important again, and collaborating, synergizing what we are doing between countries, and becoming more resilient as Europeans, and therefore more sovereign, is really on the agenda. So there's more to be done, in my view, by far more than what we've done so far.
Let's take, I think you wanted the floor as well, so we take another from the front row, and then we move over here a bit.
Thank you very much. Sabrina Fritz, German Radio AID. I want to come back to the Trump administration. Maybe you can, on one hand, take us together in space. I mean, Elon Musk plays a very important role now for the whole administration. He's very close to Trump. What could be the consequences from this? This is one question. And the other question is, if he maybe makes his promise true and will end the war, maybe not in 24, but maybe in 2 months, what would this mean for the defense industry here? Thank you.
So what has been created in the US on the space side is quite amazing. It's a huge investment from US, and we see that they continue to bet on the race to the moon, the race to Mars. So we are not at the end. And they rely on a small number of giants, which we don't have to the same extent in Europe. So it will continue to be a very difficult challenge, a very difficult competition, and we need to play at our best. What to expect? Well, we don't know more or much more than you do, because there's a lot of uncertainty that's very new, and the nature of what will change is, in my view, not yet clear. So there is more uncertainties. The landscape of what is possible is probably larger than it's ever been, but what we know is scale is on their side, and we need to work hard to recreate some scale in Europe, or we will become irrelevant. It's still time, but we don't have much time.
Well, on the defense side, I mean, obviously, and this is, I mean, pure speculation, if we would really sort of do things to that affects sort of the support to Ukraine or something, and US pulls out, that would be really a challenge for the European continent and European nations to step up even further when it comes to financial support, of course, but also how do we support them with defense capabilities? Can we fill that gap? I have a question mark myself in that, but of course we can do even more as a European continent, and that would be a huge political decision now to take if that would happen, of course. A terrible situation, I would say.
Let's see, we go a little bit back here. We'll take you, yes, and then I can come to you after.
Thank you. Jarno Hartikainen, Helsingin Sanomat. Question that is directly linked to my colleague's question previously. Now that Europe is facing a situation where it might have to very quickly step up its support to Ukraine due to the elections in the US, there was the Versailles Declaration that was signed in March 22, which included the promise to step up the European defense, including the defense industry. How would you summarize the results that have been achieved since setting this goal, setting this ambition? What has Europe achieved, and how ready are we from the defense industry point of view in stepping our support to Ukraine? Thank you.
Well, as I said in my introduction, I think it's a bit sort of different in different parts of Europe. I think some countries have really stepped up and some industries have really invested a lot. in line with what was discussed in Versailles. Maybe some countries haven't taken that step, and some countries have a little bit of fatigue or hesitation, in my view. I mean, that's sort of my perception of what I sort of read and what discussions we have, which is a bit sort of concerning, to say the least, when we really need to get together now to do as much as we possibly can. So we have much more to do, as we said, and Guillaume was alluding to that with long-term decisions on sort of capability and deterrence and security of supply and stockpiles and what have you, needs to be also invested in, because lots of what we do today is either going to countries that needs to replenish their stockpiles, or maybe just use that sort of delivery to donate it to Ukraine, and then we are in that circle so today. But there is so much to do still, I think. But of course, a lot also has been done. Honestly, I don't think we know as an aggregated type of number or facts. I don't think Europe can aggregate today in a certain, neither the Commission, I don't think NATO will know either exactly what capacity do we have and how far away are we from certain capabilities being implemented, because Europe looks like that. Nations know, of course, but do we know as a consolidated continent or European organization? I don't think so. I don't really know where we are. I hope I'm wrong now, that someone knows, but I don't think so.
Let's continue here, yes.
Thanks, Jacopo Barigazzi with Politico. I have a couple of questions. One is, one of the themes that it seems to emerge from your words is this need for a longer view. But at the same time, we see now with the Trump administration a stronger push to reach a peace deal in Ukraine. So my first question is whether a peace deal that we all hope will be fair, you are afraid that will actually impact your orders and your visibility and take out part of the momentum for the defense industry. The second question, the Draghi report talks about scale, and you also insisted on this point. But does it mean that the EU should soften or relax somehow its competition rules to allow the creation of defense giants or space giants? Thank you.
So first, I think we don't know the scenario of end of war or peace in Ukraine or continuation of the conflict, what form, and there's a lot of uncertainties. So I think we cannot pretend knowing what will have to be done and what are the next steps to be taken, and we have to be prepared for many, many different scenarios. I think the war in Ukraine has been a stark reminder of the need to be strong when it comes to security and defense. I think it has highlighted that the world is not a peaceful and quiet place, but there are threats and we cannot afford to be vulnerable. So I hope that whatever is happening with Ukraine, there will be a time where our eyes are being no longer on the very short term and what needs to be done for tomorrow, but where we will start to look up and, as I said a bit earlier, prepare for the more longer term in a very different way, and with European countries coming together with a will to create what we call the scale, but which is actually the only way to become relevant and to be resilient and to be less vulnerable when it comes to having our future in the hands of others rather than in our own hands. The second part of your question was... when you need to relax competition rules. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So that's a very important question. Thank you for raising it. I don't know if we need to change the rules. I think what we need to realize, to come to realize, is that it's not necessarily any longer about maximizing competition in Europe, making sure that we compete efficiently against each other in Europe. That comes from the time where Europe was strong, where Europe was self-confident, maybe too self-confident. We are now in a world where we have giants around us. And as the Draghi report has shown, actually we're shrinking in relative terms compared to others, and we need to see the world like it is, meaning we're competing worldwide, and if we are becoming subscale worldwide, we can't invest what others are investing. So we need to look at the market, we need to look at the future, we need to look at the competition in the way we are really facing it today, more globally. Does it need a change of regulation? Do we need to change the laws or look at the market, how it's turning now? I don't know. But I think it's really important to follow the recommendations of the Draghi report, that we are doing what is necessary to have the scale to compete on a global scale, on the global market, because that's the rule of the games. If we are very competitive, or if we have a very strong competition in Europe that makes us weaker and this competition disappearing to the benefit of others, then we are wrong. And that's what we see today. That's what we see in certain businesses, obviously in space, but also in defense. So we need to change the way we decide, we come to conclusions. I'm not able to judge whether this requires a change of law or not, but it requires a change of thinking. And that's what the Draghi report is highlighting, in my view, in a very fair way.
If I ask one comment on that also, very briefly, I mean, I agree completely. I don't think this is not a sort of a working internal market in EU or in the European perspective when it comes to defense today. There are sort of bilateral, trilateral collaborations that have sort of decided to do things together sort of without sort of doing this in an open competition. And that's why it's so important now. If we create these common initiatives, incentive programs with lots of money in it, of course we need to decide from the Commission perspective what the eligibility of accessing that money and how we govern the decisions on what are the most important capabilities that we need, and then we make sure that at least a few countries, industries work together to accomplish that, to create scale. That will be important rules, regulations going forward, but they are similar to how it's done today, I would say, if you look at the large programs in Europe. It's not sort of a pure sort of working internal market. On the other question, I think it's, I mean, Guillaume is saying that if you want peace, you have to prepare for war. And I have such a problem thinking that after this terrible war, if we hopefully get to a reasonable end to this war, with Ukraine winning the war, and we can help them build sovereign capability and deterrence in Ukraine, I don't think politicians will just go back and hoping that nothing more bad will happen. They will continue to invest, to have deterrence, stockpiles, new capabilities long term. That's so positive I am in terms of what the politicians will decide, even if this war will stop.
I think we have time for a few more questions. We haven't been in that part of the room, so well, let's take you first, and then we'll take you in the back.
Thank you.
If I can add one word. Is it working? Yeah. One word on the previous question. There's a famous say that is, hope is not a strategy. I think the hope for peace so far has been a strategy. Grabbing the fruits of peace means, well, there will be no conflict moving forward, is a form of hope. Hope is not a strategy, and Ukraine is a clear reminder that you cannot count on luck or things to happen. You have to drive things. And having security in defense and defense in Europe is a must, and it's just what has been reminded to everyone in my view. So I hope we won't be back to the previous mistakes. It's not self-serving, because we are under tremendous pressure when on the short term, European states are asking the defense industry to deliver, and we are not prepared. So that's something we need to work together with a long-term perspective, but again, hope is not a strategy.
Andrea Plasciano from Bloomberg. Air defense, I'm here. Air defense is one of these areas we've heard a lot about as one of the areas where there is the most urgent need. And there seem to be two camps in Europe right now, those who are very happy to buy whatever's on the shelf, mainly American products, and those who argue for like stepping up our own production in Europe. What do you say to the countries who are very happy to just buy American, buy whatever's on the shelf right now?
I would sort of question whether that is a reasonable long-term strategy to think like that, because where are we in this geopolitical sort of turbulence and the focus that the US will have, for example, on the Southeast Asia and China and Taiwan going forward? to help create capabilities in Europe and by European, because we have strong European defense industries that can create an integrated air missile and defense system if we collaborate on that. It's not one player, it's not maybe even two players, probably 3-4 players that have to come together to do that. And that should be supported by the countries in Europe. That's my strong view.
And I think that comes back to what we said earlier. This is a long-term industry where scale matters, where investments are very significant. If you don't prepare for the future, on the short term, you have very little options if you don't have your own systems. So what you are highlighting is the tension between the short term and the long term. On all the systems that we have not invested in Europe, the only, in most of the cases, the only short-term availability is outside of Europe. But we believe we need to build that capacity on the long term. And if we are not taking the opportunity of the short-term needs, then we will never get there. So that's the tension you see. And the states, depending on where they are, their own capacities, the industries have different views, but that's the manifestation of the same problem.
So we had already here a gentleman in the back that was given the floor first, and then we'll have to check. I don't know, Guillaume, Micael, on your timing. Do you have the possibility to run the 5 minutes?
Let's take maybe 5-10 minutes. There are plenty of questions, so let's take them.
Yeah, so let's continue. We go with you first, and then we go over to you.
Thank you. Konrad Kramer from the Austrian National Daily Courier. A question to Chairman Johansson first. With the EU being a master of producing white papers, from an industry perspective, what would be the most important practical steps to be taken to step up with these common European defense projects? This is the question. And the question to Chairman Faury would be, we see a hydrogen frustration in Europe today because the projects don't seem to be ready to be upscaled. So you, as the industry who would need most of that hydrogen, how do you see this frustration? Is it existent or not? Thank you.
Well, the simple answer to sort of what's the most important thing when it comes to the white paper and what that should sort of position is, of course, that to get enough money into the common programs on top of what sort of the nations are doing today, prioritization, and then be quite simple but sort of clear on the rules of accessing this money and, you know, I mean, how many industries have to be involved, how many countries have to be involved, and then quickly get to sort of a decision body, which is maybe the most difficult thing. Who should govern what capabilities we should spend the money on? And that cannot probably be a 27 country sort of consensus decision, because that will be very difficult. So that has to be aligned with capability development that nations think are important, and that NATO maybe, because we are very much overlapping the NATO structure in terms of 23 of 32 countries are also NATO members. So quickly get to sort of an alignment, what capabilities are needed, and create that decision body that everyone is sort of supporting, that must be the fact. But the key is money. I mean, look at the 700 billion that was sort of tabled when we had no choice during the pandemic. And now Draghi is saying in his report that we need probably 500 billion euro to step up on competitiveness on the defense side. And also Ursula von der Leyen, the president, is saying the same thing. So that is probably key. If it's fragmented and a few billion euros, it will be fragmented going forward. That's the problem, I think.
And on the hydrogen side, and allow me to take maybe 1 or 2 minutes to answer your question. At Airbus and with few others, we really believe in hydrogen for the future of aviation. Why do we believe in the future of aviation with hydrogen? What we've been doing in the last 100 years was to take carbon from underground, fossil fuel, fossil oil, and to put that carbon in the air when we burn the jet fuel in an airplane engine. We've managed to stay at 2% of the world emissions coming from aviation by a huge speed of improvement of the fuel efficiency of the planes. And nobody's asking me the question, why are you still only at 2% in spite of doubling the traffic every 15 years? Well, that's because we have done incredible things on the efficiency of planes, which are super efficient because they fly high and there is a low air density, so you don't need a lot of fuel to fly at that altitude. The next step to decarbonize is to take carbon from the air to manufacture fuels where we put the carbon back into the air. That's called sustainable aviation fuel. And that's what we're doing on the short term. And the beauty is that we can do it with the 2-day planes for up to 50% of use of SAF. And we're preparing the next generation of so-called conventional planes where we will be using 100% of SAF on top of even more fuel efficiency. But still, we will be putting carbon in the air, and taking the carbon from the air will be a bigger challenge as we move forward, as we grow the volumes. So we've looked at the possibilities to put no carbon in the air. How do you put no carbon in the air with aviation? There are very few possibilities, and the one that we believe is the best one is hydrogen. Hydrogen has a very high energy density per kilogram, much higher than jet fuel, which is amazing, because jet fuel is already an incredible product. But there is sophistication, and you need to put cryogenic on board, as you need to have hydrogen liquid to fit with the needs, the specification of flying in the air. So what do we need to do an airplane that flies with hydrogen, or I should say, what do we need to have passengers flying with an airplane that uses hydrogen? You need an airplane. Honestly, that's the easiest thing. And that's in our hands. And we are doing it. You need a regulatory framework to be able to manufacture hydrogen, to carry hydrogen, to transport hydrogen, to distribute. And you need a regulatory framework for hydrogen planes. We don't have it. And third, you need a hydrogen infrastructure to produce, distribute, and use green hydrogen. And that's indeed what we see being delayed to the right, to the extent that it will probably arrive much after the time where we could have a plane. And therefore, I share that frustration that we could do things much faster, but as the aviation industry, we won't be the only one using hydrogen. We can't be driving that change, and we need a hydrogen society to be developed around us. So that's something to be kept in mind. Europe is slowing down significantly on hydrogen. Unclear to me what's happening in the US, because we have some contradictory signals, and some investments are very strong on green hydrogen in the US, and China keeps moving. So maybe the landscape will be different, but we have to adapt our speed on developing the planes to the reality of the hydrogen society, and indeed, I have also my frustration on that side. Bottom line, we have to be faster on sustainable aviation fuel, because we will live with SAF for probably longer than what we thought.
And we have a last question over there on the corner.
Thank you. Andrew Gray from Reuters. We've heard a lot today about what you expect from European governments. You want them to change the way they procure, particularly in defence, and you want them to spend a lot more money. So I wanted to ask, what are you willing to change from your side? Because you're asking quite a lot from them. And I wanted to ask about a couple of points in particular. One of the things you often hear about the defence industry is, as you say, it's not a proper European single market. But that means a lot of companies have privileged relationships with national governments. So are your members ready for more competition between each other in order to get value for money for European governments? Excuse me, European taxpayers. And similarly, another issue that you often hear is that the European defence industry is concentrated in a few countries, and if a lot of money is to be spent, European taxpayers' money, that money is going to need to be spread around. Do you have any ideas as to how that can take place? How do you change to make this a more palatable offer, if you like, to European taxpayers?
I'm not saying this is a sort of an easy way forward. I mean, from a national sovereignty perspective, of course, it's not only about what industry is prepared to do, it's also about what the politicians will decide needs to be national sovereign capability, security of supply in countries. But as an industry leader, I can only speak for SAAB in this case. I would be absolutely open for more collaboration and create sort of interdependencies to create scale. I think there's no other way forward if we want to be a global sort of player and create what we need in terms of deterrence and capabilities in Europe. But that is a sort of a country by country, industry by industry perspective on how to actually resolve this. You can't sort of both have and eat the cake, so to say. You need to sort of take this step, realizing that scale is important. You can be part of that sort of collaboration ecosystem and still have a good industry, but it sort of gives up sort of some sovereignty capabilities, and you need to create interdependencies. Absolutely. The other question was? Oh yeah, now that's also important. If we decide to sort of do more together, and that must be in a fair way distributed to all the countries not even having a defense industry to start building new ones, that would be devastating. You have to realize where you sort of your center of gravities are within the European sort of continent to say, okay, we have to build upon that. But you would anyway create an ecosystem of sub-suppliers and supply chains that will benefit many, many countries. But to try and create new champions in all the countries would, of course, not be the right way forward. That's the way I see it.
If I may, additional comments, because underlying to your question is the sort of belief that the way it is done today is competitive for the taxpayer, for the citizen. It's not the case. It's not the case because most of the value of what is spent in defense in Europe goes outside of Europe. And when you are subscale, actually when you are so fragmented than you are today, the cost of R&D, the cost of the non-recurring amortized on a very small number of systems is very inefficient. So yes, competition is important, but scale in those projects is extremely important. And I like to say, when I'm speaking about civil aviation, that would we have a German aircraft manufacturer, a French one, a British one, and a Spanish one, that would be so fragmented that actually it would be non-competitive. Those manufacturers would probably no longer exist, where Airbus has managed to have the level of investment that was required. So I don't think that moving from where we are today to a situation where the European countries would invest much more in Europe with European companies that would merge would be less efficient. I think it would be by far more efficient. And I think that comes back to what the US did at the end of the Cold War with what I think was called the Last Supper, when they went from 60 fragmented companies, because there was a time where they were spending a lot of their GDP on defense, to the post-Cold War, where they went from this 60-ish, forgive me for the numbers, that's probably not precise, but to 5, 6, or 7 big players. That's not what we have in Europe, being even more fragmented and at a smaller scale. So what we have today is not good for the taxpayer. And we could do something that would be much better for the sovereignty and the resilience of Europe, less vulnerabilities, plus having more of the value coming to Europe, better for the taxpayers. On top, with what I said at the beginning, a lot of cross-fertilization of the technologies developed for defense going to other sectors and to the civil side. So I think it's a win-win-win, and it's not a threat. But indeed, as we discussed earlier, there is a tension between the short term and the long term, and there is the need for states to accept to cooperate more with other European states in bundling the demand. It's to come together to synergize demand. It's not only about supply. Are we ready to do a lot on our side, on the industrial side? I think we are ready to do much more than what we are doing today if those conditions are in place.
Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you, Micael. I think we need to stop there because of our plans for the rest of the day. Let me just say from my side, I won't try to sum up because it's been very deep analyzing questions and deep answers, but let me say from my side a couple of comments anyway. First of all, we are very pleased to see that so many of you took the time. We really, as an industry, want to have a better outreach and talk to media. We want to be in the debate. We consider our industries as strategically important for Europe, and we would like to have that recognition all over the line, in policies, in regulations, etc. We do that simply because the safety and security is the fundamental key enabler for a sustainable society. And we do that because we believe that mobility, traveling by air, is a key enabler for so many other strategic values to society, as being able to connect between politics, between continents, trade. Did you know that 1/3 of the global trade travels by air? If you count it by value rather than volume, then it's 1/3 of the trade. So you can just imagine what air transport means for the global trade. So from that perspective, we have huge challenges. If we want to be where we should be with the European defense capabilities, we need investments, we need risk sharing, we need the politicians on our side, but we need as well the taxpayers on our side. And to see the return on investment from the taxpayers, it needs to be seen as this is an insurance premium that we pay for European security. And to solve the challenges in aviation, not to stop flying, but to fly carbon neutral, as Guillaume is saying, that calls also for a huge portion of regulatory frameworks, new technologies, research, etc., that goes far beyond what the industry can do alone. So we need to work together with the European society. We need, when it comes to aviation, to work together in the global society. This is also why ASD is very active in Montreal towards ICAO through our membership in what is called ICC-AIA. This is an aeronautical manufacturers association for the entire aeronautical industry all over the world, more or less. So it's this is the single voice from the aeronautical industry towards ICAO directly. And we need to ensure that the regulatory framework that is coming out in those discussions are coming out in a way that respects the level playing field for European technologies, for European players. So in that perspective, there is no place for fly shaming. There is no place for defense guys being the bad guys. But we need to be better on the storytelling on our side. And this is why we have in ASD also taken a board decision to be more out and do more on communications and to try to provide more material, to provide the facts and let the facts speak for themselves. So having said that, I'm very happy that so many of you took the time, and very pleased to, if there would be follow-on questions. Today is fully booked, tomorrow is fully booked, but would there be follow-on questions later on, just get in touch with Adrian and we'll absolutely try to answer as much as we can. Thank you very much to everyone, and thank you to Guillaume and thank you to Micael.